Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest instalment from Isamu Rat Care. I'm going to do another in my breeding series today, so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of planning in for your rattery. So going from getting established and starting out and trying to make sure that you do things in the right way, in the best way for you as well, and then going through what kind of rattery you might aim to be, and then on to planning for particular litters. Something that I've got a good example at the moment. I will show you my next litter plan. They're currently down at the side down here, so they will appear as if by magic. They are caged because otherwise it would be chaos right now, since they're both a boy and a girl, but I'll go through that later. Anyway, so starting out and thinking about what you want from your rattery. So one of the first steps I would recommend for anybody that's thinking about breeding is to get along and get involved in the fancy. So by the fancy, this is a term used to generally describe a group of people that kind of breeding for kind of excellence in any particular animal. The dog fancy, the rabbit fancy, so on. I will say every fancy is different. The rat fancy is quite unique from my experience, particularly in the UK. It's very much about people who tend to work together quite cooperatively, and the showing is still part of it. But unlike a lot of other fancies, you find that the kind of rescue side of things and the breeding side of things, you quite often get breeders that rescue, and rescues that will go to breeders for rats as well. So we're quite cooperative and friendly. It can be quite different from the world of rabbits and actually to some extent dogs and such, where there's quite a bit of rivalry at times. I think this is a good thing. It's only for the betterment of rats after all that we kind of work together. So on to why I think you should get involved in the fancy. So the fancy is a pool of people with a hell of a lot of experience. There's a lot of people that breed, but there's also people that don't breed as well, and you can learn a lot from them as well. So as a breeder starting out, whilst you can read up on a lot of the information, you can watch videos like this, you can kind of find the rats you want to do and do it all on your own, you miss out on absolute masses of experience. I mean, I've been a rat owner for a long time now, and yeah, I still learn something, well, very, very regularly actually, but particularly from other members of the fancy. So I find it invaluable coming along to the shows, being part of, there's several different clubs in the UK, and I suspect it's similar in other countries. And we have the National Fancy Rat Society, which is a kind of national club. It covers all the different areas. That is particularly useful for me as a breeder, because their forum is a wealth of kind of really experienced breeders, and actually I'm friends with the majority of them as well, which is nice. Then you get the kind of local clubs. So NERS, you've heard me probably talk about before if you've watched many of my other videos. That's the North of England Rat Society, and that's a club close to my heart, so what I'd call my home club. Then you've got the Yorkshire Rat Club, the Midlands Rat Club, the London Southern Mouse and Rat Club. So they all kind of exist, and in a local area they're a really good way for you to meet local breeders, as well as go along to local shows. The NFRS does post various shows around the country, and that can be useful as well. So why go to shows? I would say, and actually I'd recommend you watching one of the other videos on there that I did for NERS, which is all about why show. But for a quick kind of summary from a breeder's perspective, by going to shows, not only do you see lots of different kind of rats, you get to see what really good looks like. I mean, nothing you see there will be perfect, but you'll see some bloody gorgeous rats, and you'll also meet some lovely temperaments as well. And that's really good because it helps set your sights high. And it might seem a bit daunting at first, seeing these rats that people have worked on for kind of many generations, but it's achievable, and it's something that you may find something that you really, really love, and you may find it belongs to a particular breeder. Get talking to them, learn from them, and actually get help from them. Maybe that's in the way of advice, maybe that's in the way of rats for your own line, or recommendations for other ratteries that can help you out. But I've done a lot of that over the years, and it's been really, really useful. And actually in return I do try and help other people out via shows, and actually via online too. So this online fancy represents a way to not only kind of see what's out there, but also help improve what you've got. And I find, like, particularly entering shows, it's quite important to me, because I get a second opinion on my rats, and sometimes a third, fourth, etc. And that's from people that don't know they're my rats, and they're completely unbiased. They can look at them and they can see the good points and they can see the flaws, and I can get that on a piece of paper. And everybody has a slightly different view, but I find that if you breed a truly excellent rat, people will recognise it as that, and then it's really good feedback, and they can pick out faults that you may not find easy to see. There's some rats out there that I just know if I put a rat in front of them, they'll be able to tell me in seconds whether it's got a chopped rump or not, and it's something I don't look for in my rats. I probably should, but it's something that's kind of lower on the level of importance. I don't stare at the bums very often. I'm staring at the heads because I'm more of a head person. But it helps me try and make sure that my rat's the whole kind of picture, if you know what I mean. It's a good quality rat in all dimensions, and then I love seeing them in the pet side of things, and actually just being around the show, because you get to test them in an environment that is not normal for them, and how they respond tells you a lot about their personalities and their temperament, and that helps you make good choices in terms of temperament and continue that on. So it's good from a kind of type varieties point of view, and good from a kind of temperament and pet home point of view. Not to mention it's a lot of fun, and I just enjoy them anyway. But so that's my first step. I'd go along to shows, I'd chat to a few people there, try and chat to breeders, experienced showgoers, people that know what's going on, meet some rats. So by meeting the rats and looking at the different varieties that are around, you can get a feel for what the right kind of variety you want to breed is. And I would pick one or two. And I'd try and pick something complementary to start off with. Not all varieties are complementary. So you can get things like, for instance, what I breed, black and agouti. In fact, two of the rats that I'm going to appear with later, they're often where people choose to start. But I will say that if you breed blacks into your agoutis are not quite as nice a colour quite often. I still do that, and it's not a major conflict, but it does affect their show thing. But I love both colours, and actually I'm looking to work away from that, and I'll explain a little bit about that later on. But then you can get other things like, so Siamese you would never breed with a marked rat, because if you breed a Siamese with a marked rat, its lovely dark points that it gets on its paws and its nose and its bum will often get obscured by the white marking, which can kind of really wreck the look of them. So those are kind of things from a showing perspective. So if you're interested in showing for varieties, you have to think about complementary varieties from that point of view. But I would say it's useful to pick something that you can show to start off with, because it's a good way of getting your type critique and such, and it is fun. You can earn something called your stud name, which shows that you're kind of regularly showing good quality rats, and it's quite a nice part of it. Some people choose just to show from the pet point of view, just going to the pets part of the class, that's fine. I would say if you do that though, make sure you're getting an experienced judge to have a look at your rats and look at the type. So whilst I can understand not being so fussed about getting the perfect shade of agouti or the darkest black rat you can, I think that the physical structure of a rat is of such great importance in terms of its overall health and well-being that you need that critique. So whether you get that by entering into a show class, which is probably the easier way of doing things, or whether you go and get regular feedback, even if you've got a good eye for type, which I probably do, I would still value the kind of input from other judges and from actually other experienced rat owners as well that might not have made judge training yet, because that kind of matters, and that's how we keep the rats from turning into so you know how some dogs have been overbred to the point where their snouts are too short and they can't breathe properly. That kind of thing can happen to rats too. If we don't watch the type and if we don't make sure that we respect the rat as an animal, a physical kind of living, breathing creature, we kind of lose that. We can breed for cute fluffy pets, but we might get rats with tiny eyes that they can barely see out of, cramped snouts which don't have room for all their teeth, so they're prone to problems with that and their breathing and so on. So be sensible, get other people's opinion, and the fancy is a really good way of doing that. And as I say, it's a really good way of finding what varieties you want to breed. There are no right varieties for starters to breed. I would say some are easier than the others. Chat to people when you're there. I will say like marked varieties can be challenging because if you want to do it for show, you need to keep an awful lot, but they're very easy to pet home. And that is one thing to sometimes think about. Though to be honest, I found I breed like some litters I've had full litters of agoutis. I've never had a problem homing them, even when I've started out, because people really want good quality rats, and if you breed them in the right way, if you breed them kind of and handle them and look after them and raise them in the right way, the homes will come. And often other breeders will help you out with that as well. I know I regularly send people to other breeders because I know that they want them faster than I can produce them. Plus, produce is probably the wrong way. The rats kind of dictate that one, and they often don't do what I want them to do. So that's one of the things. So you can use that to select your variety. Talk to people who breed that variety. Talk to more than one person. They'll teach you stuff about it. Because some varieties have little tricks and I say tricks, and they have things you need to know about them. Some varieties do come with inherent health issues. At some point I might do a video on topaz, which is one of the colours I breed, and it can have problems. It's something I'm very conscious of and something I'm trying to breed to improve. But I would not recommend topaz for most people starting out because of that. If they're not fully aware of how to deal with it, it could be hard. And it's the same for some other varieties as well. It's one to be very aware of and chat to people about. And that's another way the fancy comes in very handy. So I recommend that. I'd probably start off joining the NFRS and then turning up to a few shows, and perhaps your local club and their shows as well, if you're not in a kind of common NFRS catchment area. There's also a good Facebook group called Rat Breeding and Varieties UK, which I'm on, but there's also a lot of other experienced breeders on there. That's a good place to ask more in-depth breeding questions before perhaps you've paid to join the NFRS and join their forum. But yes, get along to that and start out. So the next thing, you've talked to a few breeders, you've probably found out a lot about your chosen variety, so the next thing you have to decide is what kind of breeder you want to be. There are lots of different ways of breeding. I represent a particular kind of end of a scale, let's say, and there are other breeders that breed in a different way to me, and they still do it respectfully of the rats. I think the key thing is to understand what the right size, and by size I mean the amount of rats that you can keep and be happy with yourself. So I'm at the kind of ridiculously low end of the scale. I currently have 7 girls. That will go up shortly, but it's not going to go up substantially. I do work with another breeder, which I've spoken about before, but that enables me to breed in that manner. So me and Lovecraft Rats work very closely together, and we both keep very low numbers, but between us we've got kind of what I would say a normal-ish amount is around about probably about 30-ish rats between us, and maybe a little bit more depending on like how the time goes. That gives us enough to run a couple of projects between us. Well, we're actually looking at running 3, but yeah, that gives us enough rats for us to be able to kind of work between us on and develop our lines. You can manage with a bit less than that, but it is difficult. I'm also unusual in just that I just keep girls. Some other breeders out there do that too, but it is difficult because it means that you need to place your books very strategically with people that you will see the rats regularly and that you can trust to raise them in kind of like a good manner. You don't want the rats to become too fat because then they're going to not be fertile and actually not probably be suitable for breeding. So it's quite high risk breeding with just one sex. I will say, because you're reliant entirely on other people, but if you can find people that you can trust and that you can work with, it can be a really nice way to stay as a pet owner as well as a breeder. The more rats you get, and that number is different for every person, the less time you have to spend with them as pets. And for me, because I work quite long hours, my numbers are kept quite low, so I can still have that pet bond with my rats. At the other end of the scale, you get people that are breeding at a lot larger rate. Some people might term these kind of stock breeders, and I don't mean that as an insulting way by any means, but they're breeding with respect to the rats still as rats, but they're breeding to do things like test genetics, or I've seen them be really successful in kind of working on the health on particularly different varieties because they can afford to breed and keep a lot more. They can make kind of faster progress. It is a slightly different relationship they have with their rats, but they can still do it in a very good way. There are things that you probably should avoid trying to do like when you're breeding with rats, but there's kind of like ethical considerations that you need to do. Things like breeding back-to-back litters, so that the doe has a litter and pops out another litter straight away. That gives their body no time to rest. So these are things that you do need to think about as a breeder of avoiding. Making sure that your does have time to be does, that they're mated at an appropriate age for them, and that will vary by the line, so you need to talk to the breeder you get it from. Breeding from unknown rats is another one that you need to think very carefully about. There are cases where it is of benefit to the fancy. Let's say you've got a particular rat that is we've got nowhere else in the fancy. That might be a completely new variety. It might be a rat that is immune to tumours in some way. I don't know how you'd find that one out. But a rat that has got something that nothing in the established fancy has, then there is an argument that says that it may be useful for you to breed that, but then you have to do it very carefully, and I would say that is not generally for somebody that's new to rats. I've seen 1 or 2 people do it and do it well when they're new to it, but generally speaking, a bit of experience helps, and it helps you get through some of the pitfalls. Though again, if you're getting the right support, it is doable if you're ready for potential heartache and potentially breeding through some quite nasty health problems, and temperament problems sometimes too. But generally speaking, it's a lot easier for people when they're starting out to go and get rats from an established breeder who breeds with an understanding of their health, of the temperament, of the variety and what it entails. People that have a good understanding of the family tree behind the rats as well. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to start from somebody that's kind of actively involved in showing, registered, that kind of thing, because they will already understand kind of the breadth of the community and probably have some quite good feed-ins with other breeders as well, and they can breed some really good quality rats. It's a good way to start usually, but I would say ask questions, because every registered breeder on the list is different and they'll have different ethics and different things they're comfortable with too, and your best bet is to find somebody that has similar kind of mindset to you. One thing I should also mention actually is mentorship. So I'd say about 10 years ago, there was a very big drive for everybody to be formally mentored when they were starting breeding. It was kind of absolutely frowned on starting breeding if you weren't mentored. And then now, thankfully, it's not as strict as that now. I didn't like that. I don't think there is one true way to do it. And often these mentor and mentee relationships with a mentor telling the mentee what to do and controlling their choice of breeding partners, maybe their choice of pet homes, their choice of kind of which babies they kept and so on, which could be really beneficial if you need that kind of level of guidance. But for a lot of people, they prefer a kind of more relaxed relationship. And I like the fact now that you can in some cases find a mentor that's kind of wants that kind of relationship, and if that suits you, that's brilliant. But you can also find people that like I kind of mentor a few people, and I say by that I'm there for them to ask any questions they want to have. I'll give my opinion, but there's absolutely no need to follow it. The whole point of it is I'll explain my reasoning, but it's up to that person as a breeder, and that kind of approach is becoming more common as well. I'd say it's probably more of a friendship kind of relationship than true mentoring, and I think that works for a lot of people as well. So don't feel that you have to have that formal mentorship. I know particularly in some areas of the US it's still quite strict that you're expected to do that or you're seen as unethical. It's not in the UK, thankfully, and I still think that it's a case that you need to find what's right for you. Don't feel that you've got to become exactly like somebody else. Like the number of people that I've helped start out, they're all slightly different breeders to me. They sometimes make decisions that I wouldn't make, and that's fine because they're doing it in the right way. If they were being cruel to the rats, that would be an entirely different story, but they're not. Generally speaking, they're just using a different approach to me, and that's great, because actually by diversity and such, we're richer as a fancy. So I would definitely kind of encourage you to think about that. So next thing, you've worked out, during the fancy, you kind of worked out what you want to breed. You've thought a little bit about where you're going to get your breeder rats from. So what kind of thing do you want to look for your foundation rats? So by the foundation rats, I mean a number of does and a number of bucks are going to be the foundation for your line. Now you've got, with the does, generally speaking, you want to own them probably from quite young, though you can sometimes get breeding age does off people who maybe have had a litter out of them and are happy to rehome them. Some breeders do that. Generally speaking though, you will get them as babies and then have to kind of raise them until they're appropriate breeding age before you decide. So when you're looking for a breeding doe, what you want is to get probably at least 3 from the line of your kind of choice, assuming that breeder kind of is happy with it for obvious reasons. Make sure you discuss that you want to breed with them. If you've got the right attitude and if you're active in the fancy, most breeders will be supportive. As long as you can show them that you're going to kind of be respectful of the rats involved. So looking for kind of 3 does, you could go a little bit more. 2's probably a bit on the low side, just because you want to be able to choose when they get to the right age. And when you're looking for a good breeding doe, you're looking for a baby that's kind of solid in the hand, that feels firm and kind of has a nice, confident, calm personality. Is obviously of the kind of correct variety for what you want to breed. But also you want a rat with a little bit of X factor if you can, and that's very difficult for kind of a person starting to breed to pick. However, if you've explained to somebody that you want to start breeding and you're getting rats from them, they will often help. or they will ask other people to help pick out suitable breeding rats for you, and this is very, very useful and important. So I've got Mog out for this, because I think Mog kind of is a really good example of what a kind of good doe to breed from is, which is lucky because I'm hopefully going to breed from her shortly. But so she's now, I obviously had her from a baby. She's now got to the age where she's very fit for breeding. That will vary by the line. So in her case, she's probably about, I think she's like 9 months now, which is about the kind of a good age for ours. She's physically mature, she's solid, she's a good weight. She could have a little bit more growing to do because our line have that habit, but she's in basically peak fitness and peak of her life. When she was a baby, I had a choice between her and her sister, actually, who was very similar to her, but a lot smaller and lighter weight, and Mog was the just obvious choice. I picked her up and you could just feel the difference in them, and that's shown through in later life, actually. I just met her sister again earlier today, and she was still quite a bit more lighter weight. Mog is definitely the better rat in terms of kind of physical presence, and actually I just adore her temperament, but apparently her sister is lovely as well, but she's not Mog. So that's kind of getting your breeding does, and like I say, like Mog, you want them to be very fit, you want them to be in great physical shape before you ever think about breeding them. So that's why you want to get the 3 because, or more, because then that will give you room to choose when it comes to the time, because not every rat that you're going to get is going to be suitable for breeding from. And that's not to say they're not going to be lovely rats in their own right, but they may not be kind of, a breeding rat should be a rat that's kind of special in some way, or kind of a good solid happy choice that's got the temperament and has got the health and got the fitness. You don't want to be breeding from a rat that's been sneezy or snotty or unwell for a kind of chunk of their life. You don't want to breed from one that is very scared of everything and very stressy, because that will pass on to kind of a bad experience for the kittens. So it is very important that you pick good stuff in your rat. I'll say something about age. So I say that there's an age where a line is kind of the right age to breed, and ours is about like 9 months to, I think we go up to about 14 for a first litter, and that works well for ours because they're quite slow growing. Some breeders' lines are kind of ready to breed from 4 months, some possibly even earlier, though I'd be a bit twitchy myself with any rat that was still a kitten. What you want is the rat to be physically mature enough but also emotionally mature enough, so they need to have a certain amount of kind of sense about them. I mean, Mog still plays like a nutter, you've seen the videos, she's always up to no good, but she's also kind of confident in herself, and is just that little bit older, and she's kind of ready at this stage. Be interesting to see what she makes of little squirmy baby things, but I know that she's emotionally kind of there. She's a good girl. So the other advantage of breeding a little bit later, which was why we're quite happy that kind of our rats mature quite slowly, it does mean that you can't have as many generations in a shorter time, so it takes us longer to achieve stuff than other breeders that have rats that grow a lot faster. They also take a while to kind of get to peak showing life, and then usually we're ready to breed them, so we lose bits of the time out for that. But that's absolutely kind of fine for us, because when you breed later, you have more information on the preceding generations, which helps you make better health decisions, which is quite important to us. Also, in theory, there might be a link between longevity and speed of growth and late fertility, but nevertheless, it's handy having rats that are fertile quite late on. The oldest rat we've had a litter from was 19 months old, and admittedly it was a litter of 1, but we've had litters regularly from rats at 18 months, so ours are quite fertile still then. Second litters, I should add. We generally don't do first litters that late, but that kind of extra age helps us make decisions on stuff, but it does depend on what your real priorities are. So kind of the lifespan and health are quite a big thing for us, so that extra data is really important. I'd rather that than have a lot of generations and really improve on the variety stuff, but it does mean that it's quite slow to change. So in these 7+ years I've been breeding, I haven't had that many more generations than the 7. I should really work that out actually, but it gets a little bit blurred in terms of generations when you're kind of crossing back to different parts of the line. So that's talking about the age of the doe. The age of the buck, in fact, shall I whiz out the book that I've got actually? since it's rare that I have books in the on hand. But Mog's going to be miserable because I've got to put her back again. Right. Hello, Howard. Good boy. This is Howard. I thought I'd give a quick introduction. He does not belong to me. He belongs to a lovely lady called Holly, who is his human mum, though he was bred here actually. He is half brother to Tato, so he's one of Waggle's sons from her first litter, and he's a Goody Dumbo, and I absolutely adore him. He nearly got me keeping books again, but I managed to resist. And because Holly's a very special owner, and I was like, I don't think I'd be able to give him up for many people, but I was okay because I know I keep in touch with her. And whilst she does live quite a long way away, she's been very kind to help make this happen and help Howard come back and make hopefully babies with Moggle. So, what are we looking for in a book? So when they're babies, in terms of books, you want a bit of extra width. So a doe kitten will look different than a buck kitten. If the buck kitten looks like a doe, then it's probably not going to be a particularly broad book. Howard was a lovely, solid, chunky kitten when I picked him out. I knew he'd be one that I'd probably end up breeding back from, which is why he went to a special home that I knew I'd be able to borrow him back from. Because he had a really nice weight in the hand. His temperament was fantastic, which is why I badly wanted to keep him. And he had a bit of a presence about him. It's that kind of special X factor that's really hard to kind of describe on camera, but really matters when you want to breed well. So, when they're adults, what you want from a book is, Howard's not a bad example, you want a book that's got a bit of breadth about him. So he's not a fat book by any means, but he's quite a wide book. He's not like built like a brick. I don't personally love books that are so wide that they can't kind of be agile and do stuff. But he's got a noticeably, I'll get a bit of a closer look up for him. You notice his big wide head. This is very much a book head. He's got quite a handsome booky head there. It's still got a nice length to it. What you see some people do is, in order to get their book heads to look nice and wide, they end up selecting for shorter and shorter heads, and actually then that's when you get the kind of problems that can sneak in. And plus they look a bit like hamsters, and rats shouldn't look like hamsters. So Howard has a nice kind of decent length to his head, but also a good width and a good muzzle bed, which means that he's kind of able to fit all his teeth in healthily. He's able to kind of look really, really cute when he's not hiding his head away from the camera. Do you not like the camera, Howard? You're not used to it. But yes, so this is kind of partly why I've picked Howard. Again, you want to look for kind of a rat that's been healthy, that's nice temperament. With books, one thing I should say is, whilst it's sometimes tempting to pick the really lazy cuddle monster, in my experience they don't always mate that well. I think you need a certain level of testosterone for them to have an interest in the does, and if you keep over successive generations selecting the squishiest, cuddliest, cutest, most laid back book, you can start having problems. We actually started having problems with the books just not knowing what to do with the does, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and actually had to start picking rats that were more kind of macho. Howard's got a good balance actually. He's got a certain amount of manliness without it being overtly kind of pushy or anything. He's just a nice guy. But I think, fingers crossed when it comes to it, he should behave quite well and actually know what to do with the girl, hopefully. Or at least be enthusiastic about trying, and it'll eventually kind of get close, I'm sure. So age for your books. Different breeders do have different feelings on this. What I will say with books is, typically they're going to go through a hormonal kind of teenage boy phase when they're around, it can be 6 months to 9 months. It can sometimes be a little bit later actually as well. It depends on the line. Our lot can go up to 12 months and then just get a little bit bolshy, though it's never particularly serious. What you will find in some rats though is when the testosterone goes, they can turn into absolute kind of pains in the backside, and it can be to the point where you don't actually want to breed from them anymore, because temperamental kind of testosterone, hormonal fueled kind of anger, when it gets too far, you actually need to castrate the boy, and that isn't something you want to pass on. So it's very useful for you to have gone through that phase, unless it's a line that you really know well, and it's a line that you kind of are confident and not going to have problems with the testosterone side of things. I would not breed under about 6 or 9 months. All boys go through a slightly grumpy phase. Not all boys are, well, the majority of boys are fine, particularly well-bred boys are fine, but you just don't want to be breeding from the ones that are not fine. So that kind of gives you the lower end of the limit, unless you've got a very good reason to breed them earlier. And sometimes you do, sometimes you have to because you've got no other good choices. It's all about these compromises that I think I mentioned in my last video. They're a pain in the neck, but you do sometimes have to make compromises. In terms of the upper age limit, so sperm, I'm sure the kind of weapons of these, sperm on books is kind of, it's all produced and then kind of gradually divides over the lifetime. So as you get kind of, the book gets older and older, the sperm is had to divide more and more times, and every time it divides there's a chance of some sort of genetic kind of muck up coming to play. Sorry, Howard's just escaping here. So as they get older, you've got more chance of these genetic blips from happening. The thing with these genetic blips is they can be, in theory, good, or they can be bad, like little mutations that come in. But they add in unknown into the line, and they're generally not entirely desirable. So what you need to take into account is, as the older they get, the more of these happen, so it becomes slightly riskier. I would normally... Sorry, Mog is desperate to get a Howard here, so I might put him back for now. Hopefully this bodes well for when I try them together later. So you need to take that into account when selecting your book. So if you're going to use an older book, you want to have a very good reason to use it. And what a lot of people say is, some people think about 12 months as the upper limit, some people say about 18 months is there is no kind of right answer on that. What I try and do is I try to use a book between a year and 18 months because I'd like them to have a bit of age on them, so they're well past any chance of hormonal problems, so that I've got more data on the previous generations, like I mentioned before, but not so late that a load of mutations creep in. However, if I had a book that was 24 months old and looking fantastic, I mean really aging well, looking like a kind of 6-month-old book, springing around, really fit, really agile, I'd be stupid not to use them. So you need to balance kind of the risk against the benefit. It's like anything in life. So when you use an older book, do it for a reason. When you use a younger book, do it for a reason, and make sure you understand the risks associated with either end. And then there's a period in the middle that's kind of like the optimum age. I will say with older books as well, they're not always as enthusiastic anymore. Their testosterone will have dropped off. They may not care. So if you're going to use an older book, have a backup in mind, so that if they decide that they couldn't care less about girls existing anymore, then you can swap them in and use your second choice. I would say anyway, have a second choice, because it's stupid not to, because rats rarely go to plan. So you pick your kind of your foundation dozen book. What I will say with when you're picking your foundation books is, one very good option would be to stud to another breeder's books for your first books. So if they've got somebody suitable, this means that you've got kind of a wider selection of probably really good books. It means that you would have to send your does to them, and obviously they'd have to be in agreement with this. They would then do the mating at their house and send you back some hopefully pregnant does. That can be quite a good way to start off, and then you can keep and kind of have your books in the future from your first litter and so on. I'll bring in some kind of outcross books later on. It's one to think about. You don't need as many... Sorry, Mug just stole this control, which can turn things off. Luckily she didn't turn the video off, but she was having a good go. She's bored out of her mind in there, so I better kind of waffle on. So yes, so you don't need to keep as many books, because you can use a book to father multiple litters. One thing to bear in mind when you're using the same book repeatedly, or actually if you use the same doe repeatedly, is that then a lot of your line will depend on them. So then if they get a health problem, that means that they die young, then that is in theory in all the rats you've bred from them. So whilst it can be tempting to use the same book thousands and thousands of times because they're amazing, you do have to be sensible and try not to put all your eggs in one basket. You don't always have that option, but it's one to really bear in mind and to think about when you're planning your litters. So next thing, matching the doe with the book. So obviously I've picked Howard and Moggle Mog here. So why have I picked those two? So they're related to a degree. They're not very closely related, but they are related within our line. So Mog is coming out again. So I picked Mog because she's, like, anybody that's watching the videos will know how much I love Mog. But also Mog is physically very beautiful, as well as being an amazing little person. What I want you to do when you do a mating, one of the key things to do is to make sure you double up on the strengths but don't double up on the weaknesses. So every rat has strengths and weaknesses. So I think Mog might actually be coming on heat now, which will get very interesting shortly. She suddenly got very jumpy. So Mog's strengths. Mog is a beautiful rat. She has lovely eyes. Her ears are not too bad, actually. They're fairly good, but they're a little bit kind of delicate ears, which means they're kind of more prone to being wavy than others. She carries red-eyed dilute, which means she's not an amazing black, but actually the litter that I'm breeding from her, I want red-eyed dilute from it. I'd rather not have the black in there, but it's one of those where she's such a fantastic rat that I want babies from her, despite the fact she carries black, and actually I will work to select away from that in the future. So, lovely, fantastic rat. She keeps in condition really well. She keeps a really good weight. She's very nice, active, friendly rat. So the real strengths that I want to get from this is I want to get a rat that is not only her match in temperament, because the idea of like making lots of more Mogs in the world is really exciting to me. I also want a rat that is her equal physically as well, or at least as close as I can get that. So Howard is great because Howard has absolutely lovely eyes. His ears are actually probably better than Mog's, which helps make up for the fact hers are slightly creased. So they're slightly thicker material, I want to say. But he's got her eyes. He's got a really nice head and with a decent length, and Mog has that too. I don't want to lose that. I like a long head on a rat. And he's got a good kind of width to him without being too big, because I don't want to add loads of width because that might ruin the kind of racy doe that I'm selecting for. And most importantly of all, he's got the temperament. So Howard is very much Mog's equal in temperament, and I think that's really special. So that should make their babies like lovely, really lovely natured, and hopefully physically beautiful as well. We shall see how it goes. Howard may also not carry black, which would be interesting actually. By mating him to Mog, I will find out whether he carries black or not, because if there's any black babies, he carries black. Might do one on genetics at some point, but generally speaking, it's probably easier to read on that. But we shall see where I get to. So, Mog to Howard. So this is kind of really quite exciting to me. The litter is probably going to be all Dumbos, and it should be quite a lovely temperament litter. But like with everything, we don't know it's definitely going to work. And actually, I'm going to continue doing these videos and try and do something weekly to check up on the progress of how things are going. It might be on a slightly different topic each time. In fact, probably the next one I will talk about how you do matings, or how I do matings, and some of the other options that you can do for matings as well, and talk about the benefits and the cons on those. But for now, you've seen a little bit about my planning. It's one of those topics that I could talk for hours on. In fact, catch me at a show or kind of online for a bit of a chat, and I will happily talk to you about it. It's something that actually I do my best planning in the car with Lisa from Lovecraft, because our rats are the same thing. After all, Mog came from Lisa and I bred Howard, so it's kind of a bit of a sum of our kind of approach to rat breeding, but also other people in the car, and we just sit in the car and chat, and it's like looking at family trees. I should probably put the family trees up for these guys at some point, just so you can see the different characters, where they're the same and where there's different. And actually, I should say that I'm planning actually use inbreeding to your benefit. I could do a whole video. In fact, I should do a whole video on inbreeding. But I'd say where you want to solidify benefits, you do heavy inbreeding on the best. So that means by heavy inbreeding, I mean you might do kind of a father to daughter. If you want something that the father's really strong at and the daughter's really strong at, that will really set it in the line. Whereas outcrossing makes it harder, because you might get two rats with the same good point, but actually they may have achieved it in a slightly different way, so by mating them together you may not get that good point. But that's quite an interesting one, and I really should leave that one since we're getting to kind of 40 minutes now and you're probably bored of me talking. Plus I've got to try Mog and Howard and see whether they're feeling frisky tonight. So over and out from us at Isamu Rats today, and I hope you have a good week, and I hope I will have some good news for you soon, and maybe a bit of a video on matings.